Hello, welcome to this episode of New Cars TV. I'm your host, Andre Clemente. When Honda shocked the world 5 years ago with the reveal of its first supercar, it marked the beginning of a new era of performance vehicles from Japan. Now, shortly after, technology from the NSX began trickling down to some of Honda's mainstream cars in the form of VTEC, including a particular 1992 Integra. Now, this one-of-a-kind model featured the same performance treatment as other Honda SI vehicles. Rather than call it an Integra SI, Acura chose its own designation, GSR, which stands for Grand Sport Racing. The GSR continues on in this newly redesigned third-gen model released last year. It's an effort to elevate the Integra's image from simply a practical, costlier Civic to a genuine performance alternative to sports cars in the $20,000 price range. Unfortunately, very little was done to differentiate the exterior or interior from the base model. In fact, you won't find a single GSR designation anywhere in the entire car, as it's marketed as more of a trim level. But don't be fooled. A quick peek under the hood reveals one of the most sensational production engines on sale today, a twin-cam VTEC engine that spins to a wild 8,100 RPM. Now, 170 horsepower won't turn any heads. At 94 horses per liter, this thing makes more power per liter than any current production engine in the world. And with 10-to-1 compression, tightly spaced gear ratios, and a short 440-to-1 final drive, the GSR lays down a 0 to 60 time that's nearly as quick as the Mustang GT, all while getting you 25 city and 31 highway MPG. However, with a sticker that's north of $21,000, the GSR commands nearly 50% more than the base model, which has nearly identical suspension and similar power output. So it begs the question, does the GSR feel that different than the base Integra out in the real world? And more importantly, does the GSR treatment translate into anything special out on the racetrack? Coming up on this episode of New Cars TV, stick around. V18C1. This is the engine that's been all the rage since its debut last year. 94 horsepower per liter is incredible, but what's interesting, if not unusual, is the fact that it also produces the industry's highest piston speed at 52.1 miles an hour. That's quicker than the pistons in Honda's recent F1 engines. Now, I say it's unusual because it's not a typical characteristic you find in high RPM engines. That up and down piston movement creates more friction than anywhere else in the motor, which is why high revving engines prefer slower piston speeds for less drag, as friction is the enemy of high RPM operation. Now, you can accomplish lower speeds by using an over square design, which is where the bore is larger than the stroke. The smaller stroke will slow that piston down, hence why nearly all high revving engines are over square. But weirdly, this V18 is the opposite. Its stroke is 8% larger than its bore. Regardless, Honda made it work with some trick engineering machining, and we found that in our road test, this car feels as natural and refined at 7,000 RPM as most other cars feel at 4,000. It should be noted that, like with any other high-strung engine, things can get out of alignment over time, especially with aggressive driving habits. So to keep the valve train spinning like clockwork, Acura specifies checking valve lash every 15,000 miles and adjusting if needed. Now, with the exception of these black leather seats, which are optional, the only way you can tell you're inside a GSR is with this 8,000 RPM tach and these little tweeters here on the door panels. Only the GSR gets these tweeter speakers, making it a 6-speaker system. Base model does without them. They have to live with a 4-speaker system. Right off the bat, while it feels a bit low, this has to be one of the best front-wheel drive shifters I've experienced in recent memory. It's short, but it's not too notchy, and just glides into each gear with just the right amount of effort. The front end does get some GSR specific upgrades too, like a strut brace and a bigger front sway bar, although there's still quite a bit of body roll. You know, you really gotta admire Honda's dedication to unequal length double wishbone suspension in their cars, which is what this has, front and rear. It's not cheap to engineer because it takes up a lot of horizontal space, so it's a bit of a packaging nightmare for front-wheel drive cars that already have an engine, trans, diff, axles all crammed in that area. But it really pays off, and not just on smooth racetracks. A double wishbone setup gives engineers more tuning flexibility and alignment options compared to McPherson strut, so it's easier for them to dial out unwanted alignment changes over rough pavement, such as bump steer, which in this car is virtually non-existent. And that unequal length part, where the upper control arm is shorter than the lower arm, that gives you some negative camber when you lean on it in the corners, known as camber gain. That helps give you more grip. Unfortunately, Acura did not include a limited slip differential with the GSR, but it does have equal length half shafts, which should limit torque steer. I guess you just have to find out. Yeah, there might be track prep with cage and track tires, but we seem to be catching up to them, even on our stock size street rubber. Let's see if we can catch them. Fighting for grip here. I have more power in the straights, but he has more grip in the corners. Checker flag. Oh well, we got close. There's definitely lots of body roll, but this thing handles so much better than most front-wheel drive cars I've driven, especially on these summer tires. Brake pedal is nice and firm. I love it. Very easy to modulate. There's also very little nosedive. I think the brake balance between front and rear is pretty spot on from the factory. ABS is good. It comes on a little earlier than I prefer, but that's pretty typical. But it does its job. It allows me to brake and steer at the same time effortlessly. Quite frankly, this is one of my favorite heel-toe pedal setups on a stock car. If you want to learn heel-toe, this is a great car to use. Steering is wonderful. I mean, it just feels so light, yet it still feels directly connected to the front wheels. Steering is definitely a high point for this car. I love it. This thing feels pretty stable on turn-in. You know, the front suspension bushings are soft intentionally to allow the front tires to toe out during threshold braking. This helps with stability during aggressive corner entry, which is definitely something you want in a front-wheel drive car. Gear ratios are spot on for track driving. RPMs don't drop too aggressively, so it keeps it above VTEC engagement, which is around 4,400 RPM. Now, it's easy to get the rear to rotate under hard braking, but it's very manageable. And you know exactly when it's going to step out. It makes it easy to point the car in the right direction with minimal steering effort. And that's exactly what you need in a front-wheel drive car. The straighter you keep the wheel, the sooner you can get on that throttle. That helps, especially when you don't have a limited slip to give you that extra traction. Now, I promised I wouldn't spend the whole time complaining about the lack of a limited slip differential. I'll tell you what, this car actually manages all of its power well out here on the track. Skid pad will be a different story, but here I'm not fighting any torque steer, even out of turn 11 in second gear. Now, an open diff means the inside front tire just spins uselessly on throttle out of a corner, so you have to delay the throttle a bit to avoid that. However, an LSD would allow me to get on the power much sooner, which means I can reach the next corner faster and ultimately get faster lap times. Wow, what a track day. I love this car. It's just got such good bones. They can do so much with this chassis. It's so capable. The body feels rigid. The suspension is set up just right. It's predictable. It's manageable. It's just a good, solid foundation for a great track car. Bravo. Good job, Acura. You know, I'm thinking I should just conduct the rest of the road test at 8,000 RPM. It's just so addicting at full send. It's thrilling without being too rough-edged. It's high-strung without being uncivilized. You know, with turbo cars stealing all the headlines nowadays, it's nice to know the high-revving NA motor is still going strong. But now it's time to take it down a notch. Because as fun as this car is at the limit, it's below the limit where its only real flaw comes to light. We put over 1,200 miles on this car since the road test began, and I gotta tell you, driving on the street at normal speeds, especially for extended periods, this car loses its fun factor real fast. Now don't get me wrong, we all love a car that's racy when you want it, yet well-mannered when you don't, but the GSR just doesn't feel special unless you're driving it hard. And that's a real drawback, because there are cars in this class, in this price point, that are fun to drive at any speed, even slow speeds, like Ford's new Probe GT with its torquey V6. Accelerating and overtaking around town in that car is a breeze because of all the low-end grunt. But this car doesn't have that, for obvious reasons, and you need to accept that before committing to a GSR as a daily driver. Remember, peak torque, not peak horsepower, peak torque doesn't arrive until 6,200 RPM. This power band is peakier than many race engines. We all know race engines don't work on the street. Earlier we asked if the GSR felt that much more different than the base Integra out in the real world. The answer is no. They feel almost identical because they pretty much are. Allow me to explain. The base model and the GSR both make the same power from 0 RPM to 6,000 RPM. In fact, the base model makes the same torque, but at 1,000 RPM earlier than the GSR. Remember, that base car still has a twin cam, so it's no slouch. It also only requires regular gas, unlike the GSR, which uses premium. And the base car only commands around 14,000. And for that 14K, you get the same chassis, the same double wishbone suspension, the same shocks, same spring rates, the same ride height, same rear sway bar, same brakes with the same stopping distance and pedal feel, same steering rack, nearly the same weight distribution. In fact, the GSR is slightly more nose heavy. Even the gear ratios are similar. We all rave about them in the GSR, but the fact is, the base car has the same first and second gear ratios. It's only third, fourth, and fifth that are slightly tighter in the GSR. And that 440 final drive, not much different than the 430 final drive in the base car. The reality is that the GSR's stats and figures steal the spotlight to the point that no one realizes just how similar the base model is. Literally below 6,000 RPM, the GSR is nothing more than a base Integra. Except when it comes to outright grip. Out in the skid pad, the base car with its tiny 14-inch wheels and economy tires can barely manage 0.76 G, while the GSR with its 15-inch wheels and Michelin tires can pull 0.84 G. And that's a noticeable difference, but again, that's at the limit. Out here on the street, even on these back roads, both cars feel more similar than you'd think. In fact, the one item that would have made the GSR feel noticeably different here is the one item that Acura omitted, a limited slip differential. At least offer an LSD as an option. So, for over $21,000, buying this means saying no to cars like the Eclipse GST, Ford Probe GT, which, by the way, can pull higher skid pad numbers than even the GSR. And then for just a few grand more, you can get a 5.0 Mustang, V8 Trans Am, BMW 318i, and even Honda's own VTEC Prelude, which is more powerful. But I'll tell you what, some of those cars might be more fun around town, if not just all out faster, but none of them, and I literally mean none of them, feel as special at the limit as this GSR. And for one simple reason, out of all those cars, only the GSR provides that perfect balance of the key ingredients required for driving Nirvana, such as having the best engine of the bunch, and the best shifter, and and the best pedal setup for effortless heel toe. At 10/10ths, it all melts together so beautifully. I was not prepared for this car to be this driver-focused at the limit. Who would have guessed the 3rd gen Integra would be so capable with the right upgrades? I mean, come on, a 210 at Sears Point, bone stock with an open diff? I mean, you'll be shocked at how much rolling speed you can carry through these corners. There's just so much grip. And I'm not just talking tire grip, I'm talking mechanical grip, suspension tuning and balance. It's clear to me that Acura wanted the 3rd gen Integra to be the best driver's car that a front-wheel drive compact could possibly be. And if that's what you value over anything else, I can't think of a better front-wheel drive car for you than this. Well, at least for now. With a chassis this good, there's no way Acura is going to stop at the GSR. There will be a hotter variant. Just imagine what this car would be like with even more grip, more power, and an LSD. You'd have the holy grail.